Whitney Moore Young, Jr. was born in Lincoln Ridge, Kentucky on July 31st, 1921. His father was Whitney Moore Young, Sr., and his mother was Laura Young. He was the middle child of two sisters. After elementary school, Young attended Lincoln Institute. Lincoln Institute was a boarding school for black children, where his father was the president and his mother was a school teacher. Young successfully graduated top of his class as valedictorian. Young studied at Kentucky State Industrial College in hopes of becoming a doctor. There is where he met his wife, Margaret Buckner. Young was captain of the football team and vice president of the frat Alpha Phi Alpha. In 1941, he graduated with his bachelor degree in science. Young's plans of becoming a doctor was put off by his illness of pneumonia. In the summer after college, he ended up teaching high school for a year. In July of 1942, he enlisted to serve in World War II. The U.S. Army at that time was segregated. Blacks was commanded by white officers and relegated to degrading jobs. This was Young's first racial experience. This experience inspired him to pursue his career in social work. In 1944, he was discharged. Young began to volunteer with the National Urban League while at the University of Minnesota, where he obtained his master's degree in social work in 1947. He was appointed executive secretary of the Urban League in Nebraska in 1950. He then moved to Atlanta to become the Dean of Social Work at Atlanta University and also co-chaired of the Atlanta Council on Human Relations. He had expectations of placing African Americans in white-only employee positions. When he became executive director of the National Urban League in 1961, he wanted to revive a conservative organization that viewed its role as narrowly oriented towards social service. His desire to make this change came mainly from two sources. First, Young had experience as an activist. Second, the growing fight that civil rights struggle urged him to make the forthright statements in support of black demands for political and economic equality. With freedom rides and marches occurring in the South and some in the North, Young wanted the National Urban League to get involved directly in the black struggle. He wanted blacks clearly to identify him and the National Urban League and also activist groups as the NAACP. At the same time, Young was able to persuade powerful whites in the midst of these unsettled racial conditions. The National Urban League was best equipped to implement programs to achieve actual black equality. As results, funds flowing into the civil rights movement went to several activist leaders such as Martin Luther King and other activists in the groups they represented, and also to Whitney Young, Jr. and the National Urban League. Young capitalized on his relationships with Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon to influence the executive branch and to attract federal money to important National Urban League projects. Young was a mediator, an organizer, and a coordinator who built a union between portions of black integrationist leaders, and later he reached out to include younger and more black power supporters. Young made a major improvement to the civil rights movement through his courageous campaigning for middle-class and working-class blacks, who wanted an end to social and economic barriers based on race. Whitney Young once quoted that we create an environment where it is alright to hate, to steal, to cheat, and to lie if we dress it up with symbols of respectability, dignity, and love. There was a critical assessment of leadership in his ambitious attempt to mobilize the resources of government, corporations, and foundations to end the poverty, distress, and discrimination that lay at the core of racial inequality in the United States. We know that Whitney Young was a civil rights leader, but he also was an author. He successfully wrote 2 books called Beyond Racism and another one called To Be Equal. On March 11, 1971, Whitney Young died of a heart attack after drowning in a swimming pool in Lagos, Niagara. He was attending a conference sponsored by the African American Institute. Whitney Young once quoted, "I am not anxious to be the loudest voice or the most popular, but I would like to think that at a critical moment, I was an effective voice of the voiceless, an effective hope of the hopeless."